This is another clade of groups, the brown algae. The brown algae are extremely diverse. We call them algae because the first ones we discovered were these massive kelp in the ocean. The key characteristic of these are they have long tubular hairs on their flagella. Okay? They can be photosynthetic or heterotrophic. They can reproduce sexually or asexually. When they reproduce sexually, they actually use alternation of generations. Alternation of generations is what we're going to talk about in plants extensively. So we're going to talk about it, but we're not going to actually look in detail at one of the brown algae's alternation of generations. Most of these are aquatic, some are parasitic, some are terrestrial. So it's another diverse group. Okay. The first group are the water molds. One of the things you'll notice about the name of the group is they're called oomycetes. When you see mycetes, we typically think of mold or fungus. Okay? Oo typically refers to egg. They can be parasitic or saprobic. What did we say saprobic meant? They decompose things. They're the decomposers of the group. Okay? They have two unequally sized flagella when they produce spores. They reproduce with separate male and female organs. We haven't seen this yet. This is the first instance in the tree of life where we've seen reproductive organs that are male and female. Okay? And a lot of these are pathogens. They're pathogens on fish, they're pathogens on frogs. In this case, they're involved in decomposing this insect. They didn't kill it. Okay? But not all terrestrial forms are pathogenic. So we know that we have some free-living forms that don't kill. All right? One example of the pathogens that we think of are the things that cause the Irish potato famine. That was actually an elemental. Okay? And I'll show you a picture of that. The second group, the brown algae, okay, you'll start to see the word algae come up a lot, and you'll see that it doesn't really have any defining characteristics. It's just a common name. So we have large kelp and seaweeds. Okay, these are things you've seen. You walk on the beach, these wash up. You'll see their long blade-like leaves. They have a structure called a stipe, and then at the bottom of them, they'll have something that anchors them to the ground. It's not a root, it's just something that holds them to the ground. Okay? So if you're a large kelp and you're living in an ocean, why might you need these air sacs? To float. Why do you need to float? Why do you need to have anything floating? You're attached to the bottom. You're in water. Yeah, it brings these photosynthetic organs out to the sun. So now here we are talking about the fact that we have organs. We have tissue types here. This is a true multicellular organism, the first one you've seen. And we're defining it because we get these large structures. We get blades. We get these stipe structures, or the air sacs. And we also get something to hold them into place. These are tissues that are defined for specific functions. When they reproduce, they make an organism that can make all of these things. And that we haven't seen before. These also reproduce by alternation of generations. Your book has a figure of the alternation of generations in brown algae. We're not going to cover it, but if you want to test yourself later once you've done alternation of generations, it's a good way to go back and look at it. Yet another example of the Straminophila are the diatoms, perhaps the coolest of all of them. These are marine, they're unicellular, they're photosynthetic, and they have an outer shell made of silica. They have silica, glass-like plates. When you look at them under a microscope, they look like shattered glass in shapes. But in actuality, they're like a petri dish. They have the top and a sort of lower piece that actually sets within it. Okay? So they're two overlapping plates. You have, it's just like a petri dish when they're round. So this one here would actually have a smaller plate that's nested underneath the part you're seeing. Okay? When they reproduce asexually, they pull those two plates apart and they make a new bottom. When they make the new bottom, the one that started from the bottom plate in the first place is smaller. So it continually gets smaller every time they reproduce. The way they get around this is actually through the process of sexual reproduction. When they reproduce sexually, they start to prevent this possibility of getting way too small to continue to function. Okay? We also talked about these guys sort of briefly when we were talking about different modes of movement in protists, and we talked about this structure called the raphe, or the raphe. The raphe actually has microfibrils that stick out of it, and we know that they extend and they lose water and they collapse. And we know that helps them move, but we have no idea how. Okay? So we actually haven't worked out how these guys move just yet. They do, they swim, but we don't know how. Okay? All right, so this is kind of the fun part. Why do we care about this group? I like to have these slides because, one, we do weird things with living organisms, but also because it helps you sort of feel like, well, why do I care? The first one, the diatoms we just talked about, when they die, they leave behind their silicon shell. Okay? And that silicon shell is actually, they're very small things. They're unicellular organisms, so they're very small. And if you collect those shells up, you can use them as a filter. And then we use them a lot in aquarium filters. So if you pile in all that stuff and send water through it, it filters out large particles that you don't want in your aquarium. They also, because they're silica, make really good insulation. So they're really used quite frequently in insulation, not like in a whole house, but in other like alarm pipes and things like that. They can be used as insecticides, and I've highlighted this in green because if you use an insecticide made of diatom particles, it's green. It doesn't introduce new chemicals into the environment. And the reason it doesn't is all you're doing is you're basically feeding the insects dead diatoms. The diatoms clog up the trachea, and if you remember, I think we talked a little bit about how insects breathe, but they have holes, like solid tube holes along their bodies. They expand and contract their body. When they do that, they're taking in the diatom powder and it clogs their trachea. If it clogs their trachea, they can't breathe, and they essentially suffocate. So it kills the insects, which is what you're trying to do, in maybe a painful way, but it's not introducing chemicals that are harmful to the environment. So it's green in that sense. And because they're fine, small particles, they do a really good job polishing metals. So some of your metal polishes will actually have diatoms within them. This slide also makes me want to eat ice cream, because in brown algae we have compounds we take out that emulsifies our ice cream. What does emulsify mean? What does emulsifier? It breaks up the fats and it allows you to digest water within them. Okay, so you're breaking up fat, and you can mix together fats and water-based materials. And essentially, when you're using cream, cream is pretty fatty, makes good ice cream. You do that, you're mixing in other aqueous stuff. Okay, so ice cream, they do this with cosmetics too. So a lot of the sort of liquidy cosmetics have this algae component in them. Okay, this is my favorite. It's particularly bizarre. You know that big algae, the big brown kelp I was showing you? That's called laminaria. And laminaria is, when it dries out, absorbs water. So what we use it for, and what is particularly bizarre, because I don't know who could have thought of this, they take the big long leaves, they roll them up, stick a string on them, and when a woman needs to be induced to go into labor when she's pregnant, they put it in her cervix and it starts to absorb water again. So it causes the cervix to dilate along with as the laminaria is expanding, and that in and of itself is a non-hormonal way to induce labor. Okay? So here are your little laminaria sticks to induce labor. But who, I mean, really, who's walking along the beach and says, oh, roll that up, put that. Anyway, so I tried to do that in the 9 o'clock lecture, but the chair of the department was here watching me, and I just couldn't get myself to make that joke. Anyway, so it had